Welcome to Sidelines, stories from the Oklahoma Sports Heritage Museum in Guthrie, Oklahoma. This 11-episode series highlights some of the most interesting tales connected to this gem of a museum, celebrating the rich history of professional and collegiate athletics in Oklahoma. Coach, the Sooner State Minor League Baseball League, the history of minor league baseball is its own, it could be its own, encyclopedia. But this specific league here in Oklahoma, let's talk some more about that.
Well, baseball was a major sport in Oklahoma from the 1800s, 1889, really before that. There was a lot of baseball being played in eastern Oklahoma before the land run. But there was a league that developed in minor league baseball in some of the small towns in Oklahoma. And it was called the Sooner State League, and it was probably about on the level as AA. Some of the teams turned in to be on the level of AAA. The Oklahoma City team did. But they were in Ada and McAllister, Shawnee, Oklahoma City, a couple of teams in Texas, one in Louisiana, but it was called the Sooner State League. And there was a man who was a lawyer and also banker named Peter Pierce, and he lived in Norman, and his grandmother lived in Ada, and he used to go down to Ada, and he would spend all day down at the ballpark for the Ada team that played in the minor leagues. And he developed such an interest in that minor league baseball that he has written about 4 different books on minor league baseball. And one of the main book that covers the history of baseball in Oklahoma, minor league baseball, from the very beginning is called Baseball in the Cross Timbers. And that area down I-35 is kind of called the Cross Timber area. He's got tremendous history in this book, and we've got several of them available at the museum. And he wrote these books and developed this interest in minor league baseball, and so he began to collect not only information for his books, but the uniforms for all of these teams. And he had some of the original uniforms, and then he had the money to have, there are several, 2 or 3 companies, Cooperstown Uniform Company, and one out of Seattle, called Ebbetsfield Flannels, that makes reproduction uniforms just 100% identical like they were. And so Peter bought a lot of those and had a collection of those. And one day I got a phone call from him, and he asked me if I was familiar with his book, and I said I was. And I said, it's really a great history book. And he said, well, I've just had this passion for minor league baseball, and he said, I've written those books, but he said, I've gotten a collection of uniforms. And he said, my health is really going downhill, and he was up in years. And he said, I don't want to break this collection up. I'd like for it to be held together, and you've been you've had your museum for over 20 years, so I assume you're pretty stable. And he didn't know how we were financially, but anyway, he said, at least I know you're there and going to be there. And he said, would you be interested in that collection? I said, well, sure we would. We really would. He said, well, I would give it to the museum if you can get it appraised and give me a tax write-off. He was a lawyer and banker, and so he was looking for a tax write-off. And we're a 501c3, so we could. And so he calls me and he says, next week, if you can, come down and we'll look at these uniforms and my books. He was getting ready to move from Norman. He had sold his home and to an apartment in Oklahoma City. So we went down there, and we started pulling out uniforms and uniforms and uniforms. He had 90 uniforms, over 90 uniforms, and they are in excellent condition. And we could hardly had room to bring them back. We were fortunate we took 2 vehicles down there. And then he had, 50 or 60 of these books, and some of all 3 of them, but mainly some of them of the main book that's a hardback book. And so he donated all of those to the museum, and we have them there available if you're interested in minor league baseball. And it has pictures, it has the history of the players that played in the minor leagues that went on to the major leagues. And a lot of people didn't know that some of those players played in Oklahoma. Whitey Herzog is one of them. He played for McAllister. Roger Hornsby played on one of their teams. And those guys went on to be great major league players. So we have a collection of about 90 jerseys that he gave to the museum, and they're in our East Gallery, and helps to keep the history of minor league baseball alive. And as time passed, minor league baseball kind of died. You know, the Oklahoma City Indians, that team died for a while till it was restarted as the Oklahoma City 89ers. Mm-hmm. But even now, we are limited in the amount of, really the only 2 minor league teams we've got are the Oklahoma City Dodgers, who were the Red Hawks, that were the 89ers, and now they're the Oklahoma City Baseball Club. But they are affiliated with the Dodgers and the Tulsa Oilers, and they've been called the Tulsa Oilers and Drillers both. And those 2 are our major minor league teams in Oklahoma now, and minor league baseball on the town team basis is pretty well died.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of folks realize how much of the history of so many small towns in Oklahoma involved baseball.
It did.
This league itself, you know, Ada, Ardmore, Chickasha, you know, Lawton, McAllen, all these smaller Oklahoma towns. I imagine back in, you know, the 40s and 50s, those baseball games were probably, that's what you did for entertainment, was go to these games.
That's right. There was no TV. There were movie houses, but that was the main thing the town focused on. There were 2 things that held small towns together at that time: the schools mm-hmm. and the baseball team. And they just rallied around those 2 things. And so a lot of people in the oil business and other businesses financed those teams, and then they became attached to the major leagues, and the major leagues passed their uniforms from the major leagues down to the minor leagues. So some of those minor league teams, their uniforms look just like the majors did.
That's cool.
And we've got even as far back as the St. Louis Browns uniforms over there, and which eventually became the Washington Senators and the St. Louis Browns were in that same era. And so it is really an interesting collection. His books are so interesting if you like history or if you like baseball. Because he was so interested in Ardmore, he's written one that's just about Ardmore, one that's just about McAllister in that area, and then there's been the maiden book is about the whole league that ran from 47 to 64 or something like that.
Come to the Oklahoma Sports Heritage Museum here in Guthrie and learn more about the Sooner State Minor League Baseball, Minor League Baseball League.
Right.
I'm close. Thanks, Coach.